defend himself. He can't defend himself. He had one bullet in the gun, it went astray. Now he can't defend himself. He's beneath me. I'm in the mount. I'm slapping. I'm punching. He knows what I'm talking about. He's an MMA fighter. One day maybe he can challenge me, and so on and so forth. No problem.
Wasting your time.
And so on and so forth. And that's it. I say this to you today, and I say to you with all my vigor and all the confidence. He has no answers to the rotundity problem, to the 6,000 year problem, to the internal contradiction problem, and I have all the answers today.
So, it's always true that if you give a man like Hijab enough rope, he'll hang himself. And that is exactly what he just did. Exactly what he just did.
Use this point next.
He admitted that Augustine, a
church
church father, believed that the earth was round. He just spent ages arguing that no church that the earth was round from the Bible, but then admits that Augustine did. Ladies and gentlemen, the reality is, and he quotes, notice the interruption again, notice the interruption, pause my time.
Pause this time, please. Pause this time.
Yeah, right, are you done? Okay, you done? Okay, ready? Are you ready?
Wait. He asked you from the Bible.
Are you done?
You can't.
Okay.
From the Bible.
He's
Right,
gonna
are you
ignore
done?
you. He's deaf.
When you done?
Listen to you.
Okay, great.
He's
go.
ignorant.
So, Augustine himself and Origen, whom he quotes, both interpret Genesis allegorically. That is the orthodox historical use of Genesis. It's only fundamentalists in the 20th century that shouted and screamed about a literal interpretation of Genesis. This is not how the Christian fathers used Genesis. So he just shot his entire argument dead because he evidenced the fact that the historical use of Genesis is allegorical and non-literal, not literal. So he's attacking the Bible based upon a literal reading when he admits that the church fathers don't do that, and then he says, show me the church fathers that do X, Y, and Z. But glory to God, the whole, not even hijab. So, on one hand, we don't need to square the Bible with science in Christianity.
He already has.
But on the other hand, the Quran is in error, even though it claims not to be. So, you can stand there and do your macho routine and try to be the big man, but intellectually, Hijab, you're beaten in your criticism of my faith and the defense of your own.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, listen to this.
Sorry, it's added 53 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take off 53 minutes.
Sorry?
So it's added 3 minutes. So I'm just going to take 53 minutes.
Yeah, oh, okay, that's fine.
It still counts.
All right, no problem. 40 now. He says that he's trying to portray that the typical interpretation of the biblical corpus from an ecclesiastic and patristic perspective, the church fathers, was an allegorized understanding, and there is no further thing away from the truth, as understood by R.C. Hanson, a known scholar who wrote books and tracts attacking Origen of Alexandria on his allegorization and spiritualizing of the text, when actually there was no precedent before him and the Alexandrian school. People like Philo, who was a Jew, who also had the same kind of understanding. Moreover, now he mentioned Augustine. I said Augustine, and very important, Augustine came to the conclusion of the rotundity of the earth not because of the Bible, but despite it. He was an Aristotelian, and he came to that conclusion. My challenge to him was to find someone who uses the Bible and exegetes it to have a spherical or rotundity of the earth perspective. Number two. Number three, he says that he tries to imply that that Augustine, he had the approach of Origen of Alexandria, which was an anomalous and aberrational approach in the exegetical method of the ecumenical church fathers, when actually the truth of the matter is he actually didn't even know that Augustine, who is a 5th century scholar, actually named his exegesis on a literal interpretation of the Bible. He had two. He had one called Against the Manichaeans, and he had one called On a Literal Interpretation of the Bible. So this guy doesn't even know his own books. I know more than him on his own books. Now listen to this. This is going to be a good night argument. I promise you today, he will go to sleep. He will go to sleep.
I am getting bored.
Okay, you will go to sleep. You are going to go to sleep. Just like I'm sure he has been many times in the ring. I'm going to say this to you once, and I'm going to say it to you very clearly. One time, Celsus, who was an apologist, a Greek apologist, he came to Origen of Alexandria, and he asked Origen of Alexandria, what do you say? How can you have a God that died on the cross?
Yeah.
Do you know how he responded? Do you know how he responded?
He's moving off the top.
Do you know how he responded?
I'm going to take 55 minutes off.
He's definitely going to sleep.
Do you know how he responded? And you can see all these references, by the way. Go kbyh.co.uk and download my PDF on the truth of Islam. You'll find all the references there. He basically allegorized it. He said, we cannot say that all of the events relating to the crucifixion are true and excuse me. Stop. Can you stop? Can you stop talking? Yeah, I know, but I can't. You're not even listening to what I'm saying.
The point is, you're not even engaging with his point.
So, listen, look at me. Origen of Alexandria, when he was asked by Celsus, and this is referenced in my article on kbyh.co.uk, he was asked, what do you say of the crucifixion? What do you say of Jesus dying on the cross? He said it should not be seen as literal. In other words, the same spiritualizing, allegorical understanding that he employed with Genesis, he employed with the crucifixion. So if you want to have your cake, you can't eat it. Because the reality of the situation, if you start saying that Genesis is an allegory, then you might as well say the whole crucifixion was an allegory. If you want to use the hermeneutical principles of Origen of Alexandria, it's over. You want to allegorize Genesis, go ahead and allegorize the crucifixion, just as Origen allegorized it, just as he metaphorized it. Why do you have it? What's your principle? What's your principle for allegorization? What is your hermeneutical principle? How can you allegorize one and not the other? Why? On what basis? Who gave you the authority to allegorize Genesis and not allegorize what? The crucifixion. Origen of Alexandria, when probed by Celsus, he allegorized the crucifixion, meaning your central tenets, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the ascension, and so on and so forth. All of that can be allegorized. And if it is allegorized, what remains of Christianity? It's all fallen apart. It's all gone. It becomes a myth, just like Hinduism. It becomes like the Greek mythology. It becomes like anything else. So there you have it. If you want to say it's allegorized, then you must allegorize. You must allegorize the crucifixion, because there is no authority that you may be granted. There is no authority that you, hermeneutical authority, yes, that you may have, yes, there's no hermeneutical authority that you have to allegorize one and not the other. And that's why it's done. And that's why you're finished. And that is why you can never stand in front of me. And you can have the rest of the time.
I'm giving rest of the time. Because I gave him an extra 55 minutes, 55 seconds, sorry.
Right, so, I've got an extra. Yeah, shall we do this last one? Okay, so am I speaking last?
Yeah.
Is this the last? Am I speaking last?
No, you go now.
No.
Is that what you want? You started.
You're the one that started, so he finished.
No, you started because you laid out the parameters of science, so I go last.
No, you bring it the
No, you started. You
bring
went.
the
You
question.
talked.
You bring it the question about the Quran, about the
You laid out the parameters of science first. Remember?
About the
You laid out the
biology.
parameters. You talked about the paradigm. So you started. So I have to finish. So I have to
When do we
finish.
start the timing?
So I have to finish.
We started from that.
This is the last talk.
Fine.
Okay.
Last round.
Right. I'm speaking last. This is the last talk, and then we switch. Yeah, no.
I can only time 15
Right, are we ready? Are we ready?
It's your last round, and then
No,
afterwards.
like, this is the last talk. Done. After me. Done. Finished. That's it started.
If you're the only one speaking, we don't
Are you ready? Are you ready? Right, guys, ladies and gentlemen, listen carefully to the double standards that hijab is asking you to work to. He is saying to you that you have to believe in a literal interpretation of Genesis. Why? Because of his quote of Origin. Now, he didn't actually quote Origin, he just threw his name into some statements. The fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, Origin is not a church father. So he's quoting the wrong source. Origin is called an ecclesiastical writer. Now notice that Hijab wanted me to pay attention, but he's not doing it now. So, ladies and gentlemen, we Christians are not committed to a literal interpretation of the Bible in toto. We don't do that. Our church fathers didn't do it. He's admitted as much. He said as much. He said that Augustine believed in a round earth. He said that. So we Christians don't need to defend every statement of the Bible as if it was literally true. Now he said that the description that Origin used was literal, that there was allegorical about the crucifixion. I know Origin's writings. I read Origin's writings. And he says that there are layers of interpretation to the scripture that include the literal and go beyond the literal. And he was talking about the metaphorical symbolism that we can pull from the crucifixion. He was not denying the historical event of the crucifixion. Hijab tried to mislead you. No, the Quran has made a number of factually false statements. And it doesn't matter with what bombacity Hijab prances around in this little theatre of ours, flexing his muscles, kissing his muscles, and trying to talk about beating people up intellectually. The reality is that his Quran has finished his religion, because his religion, his Quran, says that if it was from any other than Allah, I would find errors therein. I would find contradictions. The Quran says bones became flesh. This contradicts embryology. The Quran says that the earth is flat. This contradicts our study of the world, which is clearly spherical. The Quran states that the sun sets in a puddle of mud. A puddle of mud. And it clearly doesn't set anywhere on earth. I have found errors in the Quran, and the only way that he gets around them is what? Is by saying, oh well, Muslim scholars knew better than their Quran. I agree, but so did the Greeks before Jesus know better than the Quran. He said, well, your church fathers didn't believe in the earth as being round from the Bible. But then he showed that those church fathers do believe in the circle of the earth. Do you honestly believe that they would uphold the idea of the circle of the earth in one hand, and then, as Christians, say that it contradicts the Bible? Of course they wouldn't. And why do they not see a contradiction?
Why, Bob?
Because as the church fathers demonstrate consistently, the reading of the Bible is not meant to be a scientific text. It does not have to be read that way, nor does it have to be defended that way. And so his criticism of the Bible is misplaced, because it is not what we Christians believe. But he believes that every utterance of the Quran is true. And we have demonstrated that there are utterances of the Quran that are false. How many times does the Quran have to be wrong? Time. How many times does the Quran have to be wrong? Okay, I'll finish on this point then. How many times does the Quran have to be wrong before we say it is wrong? Once, twice, 3 times? You had 3 examples today. Only one will do. The reality is, bombastic as you are, Hijab, loud as you are, Hijab, you are intellectually scuppered because you are trying to defend a book that makes indefensible claims about itself. Okay, it's lovely talking to you, as always. No, we said that we were finishing on this talk. That's what
Let me do one, and you do one more.
Fair enough, one more round.
On the muddy pool one, Job chapter 1 verse 4 says the same thing, same exact thing. Job 1:4.
Wait, I need to time it.
Time it.
You timing it over there. Job, you timing it over there.
You want to time it? It's up to you. You can both time it at the same time.
You time it. He's going to time
You can both time
it.
it.
He'll show you the 5 minutes. Let him see the 5 minutes.
I'll hold it here so you can see.
Alright.
Okay, so
Now, it's very important.
55.
Fine, you got it.
Okay.
It's important to know here, the 3 examples he gave. Number 1, the embryology, which we spoke about in detail. That there are 2 readings. One of them implies simultaneity and the other one doesn't. One of them is chronology. And even on the one that talks about chronology, we talked about with references the fact that including bones or azm in Arabic language is the cartilaginous models, which are referred to in Arabic as ghudruf, which according to Fairuz Abadi, he mentions that that's included in bones. So there's no issue here. Number 2, he talked about the earth as being a mahd, the earth as being a mahd. And we said that that was used in the context of a baby boy in the cradle of his mother. It doesn't signify shape, but it talks about function. The function of the earth is facilitated for the human being. It's expensive. It's meant to be from the anthropocentric phenomenological perspective. Number 3, he then talked about the muddy hatta either when Dhul Qarnayn went to the muddy spring. Now he said, فَوَجَدَهَا تَغْرُبُ فِي عَيْنٍ حَمِئَةٍ. He saw it, he observed it, he found it going into a muddy spring. This same terminology is mentioned in Surah Naml, chapter number, Surah Al-Qasas, chapter number 28, when the hudhud, when the bird says, إِنِّي وَجَدْتُ امْرَأَةً تَمْلِكُهُمْ وَأُوتِيَتْ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَلَهَا عَرْشٌ عَظِيمٌ رَأَيْتَهَا وَقَوْمَهَا يَسْجُدُونَ لِلشَّمْسِ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. This is mentioned about when hudhud, the bird, saw the woman, so it's always talking about from the perspective of the bird. So here again, we're talking about the perspective of Dhul Qarnayn. It's something which is clear. Number 2, number 3. So we talked about all 3 points. He then talked about origin of Alexandria. He was right that he is seen as an ecclesiastic church father, ecclesiastic patristic writer, and the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church have not put him as a church father. That's true. That's true. That is true to say that because of something called the origin crisis that happened after his death, in fact, in the 4th century or the 5th century. So having said that now, it doesn't matter because he actually agrees with Origen's hermeneutical method. In fact, all of the other church fathers, with almost no exception except for the Alexandrian school, didn't have the approach that Origen of Alexandria and Philo and others had. So number 3, now we have to ask. He said I didn't reference it, so let me reference it right now. This is what he says. Origen was asked about the crucifixion. He says the events that have been recorded to have happened to Jesus do not possess the full view of the truth in the mere letter and history. For each recorded event is shown to be a symbol of something else by those who read the scripture more intelligently. This is in his book against Celsus CC, chapter 2, verse number 69 is also mentioned, kbyh.co.uk, and go to the article that I've written on it for all the references. Having said this now, the issue is he's admitted himself that the Bible is not free from error. And the Quran is making the point that you can't say the book is from God if it's not free from error. Now you have a decision to make. If you want to follow a book that is erroneous by the admission of this man, or a book which at least says it's a necessary, not even a sufficient condition for you to believe in a book which has no errors at all. He doesn't uphold the standard of biblical inerrancy because he knows that's an impossible standard for the Bible to maintain, and he admits candidly that the Bible is erroneous. And I may add, he didn't answer anything I said. He didn't talk about contradictions, the internal contradictions of the Bible, that in Origen's understanding and other people's, that even the Midrash confused. Why is it that it's mentioned that the luminaries were created on the fourth day, and that the sun and the moon, that the night and day were created on the first day? Why is it, how could you have, from a scientific perspective, the plantations created on the third day and the sun created on the fourth? What kind of photosynthesis will take place? Now, how can you have plantation on the third day on Genesis chapter 1 and in Genesis chapter 2 verse 6 no plants has sprung up yet? So here you have contradictions within the text. You have contradictions outside the text. So contradictory is it that even the ecclesiastic church writers like Origen of Alexandria here admits it, and that's why he had to allegorize it. But if you do that, then you must allegorize other things that he also allegorized, in which case you are in a hermeneutical dilemma, and it becomes a mythological tale that is no different from Greek myth or Hindu myth or anything else. If we start allegorizing one thing with no precedent, or at least aberrational precedent, then we must allegorize anything we want, and that is the situation he finds himself in.
Okay, right, let me reply to this. Because again and again oh wait, are you ready? Okay, go. So again and again and again, hijab here creates a false dichotomy. He tries to tell you that you have to believe in Genesis literally. The early church fathers don't teach a literal interpretation of Genesis. So we don't need to defend the Bible literally. And so these problems that he's talking about are not there, because it's dependent upon how we interpret them. Don't interrupt hijab. Don't interrupt hijab.
Who doesn't do it?
Pause. Right, don't interrupt.
Who doesn't?
Don't interrupt.
Apart from Origin.
I know we didn't do this to you, hijab. You do this tactic all the time.
No, but I don't know.
You do this tactic all the time. It's just a dominating tactic. Control yourself. You're a trained fighter, for crying out loud.
Not really. He is.
Ready? Are you ready? Ready? So, the fact of the matter is the church fathers is doing this simply to distract. Brother, please don't engage him. Right. So put 10 seconds back onto my time. Stop trying to do this tactic, hijab. It's cheating, mate. You know it is. Right. So we'll try again. So the church fathers don't teach a literal interpretation of Genesis. So he's attacking Genesis based upon the fact, well, how could the sun be there before plants? It contradicts science. When the book of Genesis was revealed, it wasn't revealed as a science lesson to the Hebrew Israelites. It was revealed as a theological lesson to the Hebrew Israelites. It was teaching the Hebrew Israelites that there is no God but one God, and He is the God of the stars, the plants, the rivers, the sea, the land, the birds, the things that crawl, and mankind itself. That's what Genesis is really teaching, and that is how the early church fathers interpreted Genesis. No! We Christians, he said, I teach that the Bible is in error. No, I don't. I teach that every word of the Bible is true, properly understood. And properly understood is not interpreting every word literally. And that is substantiated by the earliest strata of my writers, the church fathers. And he said it was just Origen No, it wasn't.
St. Alexandrian.
Augustine also did it. And Augustine wasn't from the Alexandrian school. He was birthed in Carthage. So again and again and again, hijab lies and has to be corrected. And he's working on the 99-1 rule. That 99 people will not check what he says except one. No, notice he interrupts again. Because this is, yep. You done? Right. So, the fact of the Quran says that the fact the Quran makes these statements that the earth is a bed. Have you seen a spherical bed lately? Stretched out as a carpet. Have you seen a spherical carpet lately?
It's like a robot.
These things are errors in the Quran. Now, what will he do? He will argue that these should be interpreted what? Allegorically. Allegorically. That's what he will say. Not literally. Because if we interpret the Quran literally, it's false. But if we use allegorical defense in the Bible, he says, oh, you can't do that. You're admitting that it's wrong. No, he misquoted Origin again. He misquoted Origin again. Misquoting means part of the text out of the text. I have Origin's books. Origin believes in the actual crucifixion of Jesus. I know he does. I've read it with my own eyes. And I will bring those books and we'll debate whether Origin believes that Jesus was really crucified next week, and I'll show you to be a liar. Are you up for that?
Well, let me answer
Good,
that.
good. Well, let me finish.
Let me answer that.
Let me finish. Because Origin does believe in a literal crucifixion, but he also believes that the imagery of the crucifixion is so full of symbolism that you can pull meanings beyond the literal. And that's really what Origin believes. So he lied about Origin. He lied about the church fathers. He lied about our historical interpretation of the Bible. He lied about the way that we read of the Bible today. And he also lied to defend his Quran. Misquoting embryology books to say that bones grow without flesh.
10 seconds.
Time. 10 seconds. So Origin, are you up for that debate next week about whether Origin believed in an actual crucifixion?
I don't say that Origin didn't believe in it.
Oh, he's changed. No, he doesn't.
Let me say. Okay, it's done now, yeah?
It's done.
Right. So yeah, well done. You actually do have some knowledge. It's good because when we came to Origin, according to Catholic canon, it's definitely, I know that's the case, that they didn't put him into, they didn't, because of the Origin crisis, so that's well done.
But you did say to everybody he was a church father.
No, I know, that wasn't.
So if you knew that, why did you lie to them?
Let me explain. Yeah,
explain to me why you lied to everybody.
Not every Christian's a Catholic. I think you are. I didn't know you were a Catholic.
I'm not a Catholic.
All right, but I think you maybe lean in that direction. The point of the matter is the precepts you believe in will not be universally believed in by all Christians, and you accept that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So for example, today you argued against biblical inerrancy, and you know that that's one of the keystone belief systems of evangelical Christians.
Okay, so let me reply to that. Mohammed, you're going to be really embarrassed now because we have you multiple times on camera. Say 1 second, saying to all the crowd that Origin was a church father, and you've just admitted also on camera that you knew that he wasn't.
No.
So you lied to people, and this is what the Dawah team do. They lie.
Let's say that he wasn't a church father.
He isn't.
Fine.
He's an ecclesiastical writer.
Right. He's an ecclesiastical writer according to the Catholic understanding. I grant you that.
All of them.
No. I understand that. It's no problem because of the Origin crisis. However, what I'll say is this. What I'll say is it's irrelevant because what I'm saying is in the patristic period. When we say patristic period here, we're talking about he falls within that time. And a lot of Catholic scholars, and by the way, the former Pope, I think Pope Benedict, he believed that he should have been a church father. Many are in Catholicism are actually saying that Origin of Alexandria should be seen as a church father.
I'm really sympathetic to Origin.
Yeah, fair enough.
I like him.
That's what I'm saying. So whether that is something that the Catholic Church takes or not, that's something else. Origin of Alexandria, in terms of his allegorical understanding, here's my point. The issue that I was trying to say was that it's a hermeneutical principle.
Yes.
I'm not saying that he didn't or he couldn't read him to believe in a actual crucifixion or an actual
Thank you for admitting
resurrection.
that. Thank you
because
for
you know,
admitting that.
R.C. Hansen, when he, I'm not sure, do you know who R.C. Hansen is?
No.
Yeah.
R.C. Hansen is one of the biggest Christian scholars of the last 100 years. You should know who he is. He writes against Origen of Alexandria.
Yep.
And what he says is because one of the things that Origen does, he allegorizes the story of the four judges. Okay, and that's because of its genocidal nature and so on.
Yep.
You know this.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, the question that RPC Hansen, his full name, he puts forward is that what hermeneutical principle are you using to allegorize? And that's basically it. It's a bit slapdash. We don't know, like, why is he doing this? When you said about Augustine, that sometimes he does, I sympathize with some of what you said, because what you said is, although yes, he wrote two, by the way, he wrote two exegeses on Genesis. He wrote one called Against the Manichaeans, and the other one is a literal interpretation of Genesis.
And he argues against the literal interpretation.
No, he doesn't do either. There's different. Look, here's what I will say.
He literally argues against the literal
I know what you're referring. I've read this, by the way. I know.
Right, so you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about. He doesn't, despite the fact that he calls it a literal interpretation, he doesn't have a consistent literal interpretation. I agree with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, but he is contradistincted to someone like Origen of Alexandria.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so Origen of Alexandria has completely, in terms of the spectrum of allegorization, Origen would fit on the far right, if you want to call it that. Would you agree with that?
There's definitely differences between Augustine and Origen, but the point is,
that's what I'm saying.
right? But the point is hijab, right?
So the Alexandrian school fall way, like in terms of if this is literal and this is allegorical, the Alexandrian school are here, and maybe Augustine somewhere in the middle.
But the point is, right? What we've seen, and the thing is, you've admitted it all on camera, is that when the big crowd was around us, you were saying one thing. Now the debate's over, you're saying something else.
What I'm saying, but I'm saying it in front of the big crowd right here. Look, and it's
I want to make
I'm doing this for academic honesty.
Wait, if you want to be academically honest, what you shouldn't be saying is that Origen doesn't believe in an actual crucifixion.
No, I'm not saying that.
Which is what you did say.
Okay, fine. Let me
10 minutes ago.
Let me clarify.
And he heard it.
Let me clarify. What because this is a good point, yeah? Whether Origen believed...
I will debate you next week.
I don't need to debate.
Do you accept Origen believe in a literal crucifixion?
Like Paul, the question of, did Paul believe in an actual resurrection?
Of course he did.
Right, no, but you know that there is a discussion about it. Do you know about that?
There are discussions amongst heretics, yes.
Yeah, all right, fine. One man's heretic is another man's... One man's, heterodox is another man's orthodox.
Imam Bukhari being a perfect example.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, Imam Bukhari and Ahmad, all of them.
Yeah.
He's one man's, he's our orthodox, but he's the
He was considered a deviant in his own time.
Exactly that. So
There you go.
when we're doing the study of history, we have to try and be objective about these things. So what I'm saying is, on this point of Origen of Alexandria, my point wasn't that he might have rejected the crucifixion outright as a literal thing. I'm saying, like you said,
It literally was though.
It's all right. He's just undone everything
Calm
that
down.
he said.
Calm down.
When he was speaking,
Leave him.
We're actually talking alright.
It's all right.
We're talking alright.
have some respect.
Don't let him goad you. You know he does it.
Have some respect.
Look, what I'm saying is, what I quoted when Celsus came to him was that when he was, and this is my, let me make it very clear what my postulation is. Okay, I don't want you to straw man because you have a tendency to that. In this discussion today, I said find someone who looked at the Bible, and then you forgot about the second point of what I said, and you just went with the first one. I want you to understand the argument, so you can. But if you want to develop Christian products which are strong and veracious, you have to know my argument first, right?
I heard your argument.
No, but what? So listen carefully to what the argument is. The argument is not that Origen of Alexandria allegorizes everything, or that he might not believe in the resurrection or crucifixion. What I say is, what seems to be apparent from his works, and I talked about on First Principles, the Butterworth translation.
I have the first principles.
Yeah, Butterworth. Look in the back of the book. Yeah. Because there's like an appendix section. If you look at that, you'll find that his approach seems to be where something is contradictory or seemingly contradictory, he allegorizes it.
Yep.
So what I'm saying is, he done that with Genesis, and then he done that again with the crucifixion. Because when Celsus came to Origen of Alexandria...
He didn't come to him.
What do you mean he didn't come to him?
They didn't sort of come together and have a discussion.
No, now you're being a bit ridiculous. Now, when they spoke to each other, like me and you are speaking to each other right now, right? When they spoke to each other, Celsus is not a Christian, you know that, yeah?
I know that, yeah.
Yeah, so when he was doing what I'm doing with you right now, he's debating him. So Origin was expected to provide an apologetic response. When he did, he allegorized. So what I'm saying is, where something seems inconsistent, he allegorizes. That's all I'm saying. And so therefore, from our paradigm, we're saying there shouldn't be any inconsistencies anyway. And even here's what we're saying. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
So let me reply. Because what you've just done is admit that my principle is accurate. Because I said that you've got to judge the Quran from within an Islamic paradigm, and you've got to judge the Bible from within a Christian paradigm. And the historical Christian paradigm is not based upon literal prima facie interpretation. That is the historical, continuous use of scripture from the church fathers to the present. Church fathers today are still doing the same thing. One second. You believe that the Quran is inerrant in all of its statements, but you never addressed the flat earth. And when you did address it, you said it was from the perspective of the people. So kind of the same kind of arguments that a flat earth.
But that's not the same as allegorization.
Well,
you know that.
yeah, but one second. But that statement that you've made about from the perspective of the birds isn't coming from the Quran. That is coming from you as an apologist defending what the Quran is plainly saying at prima facie level.
That's the genetic fallacy, right? Because what you've just fell into is the genetic fallacy. Whether I'm offering an apologetic reply or not is irrelevant. Most of your church fathers, like Justin Martyr, was an apologist. It doesn't mean just because he's doing that what he's saying is wrong. So you're better than that to make these kinds of interrogations. And what I say is, in terms of the perspectival, that's very clear in the Quran. That is what is intended. You know, that there's two recipients of the Quran, the human beings and jinn. So it's going to be from a human perspective. It's not going to be from a transcendental, godly perspective that he can see every little thing. That's not what it's meant to be. It's meant to be a thing. Another thing is this. The point of Origin of Alexandria, what I'm saying is, the hermeneutical principle is problematic. Because if you say, here's the question. And I asked this to many people that I'm sure you would respect, who are Christian scholars in their own right. I said, where do we decide to stop allegorizing, start allegorizing? So now the hermeneutical principle, where do we decide this is where it starts, this is where it stops? What I'm saying is, by the way, you said that I said that the Quran is allegorizing. I allegorize it. No, I don't allegorize anything in the Quran when it refers to a natural phenomenon.
Okay, so let me reply to that. You said that I was guilty of a genetic fallacy.
Yes.
And then you said that Ignatius was an apologist.
No.
One second. Justin Martyr was an apologist. But Justin Martyr was also a bishop.
Yeah, okay.
Are you the equivalent of a bishop? Are you like an ulama? No, it does matter. Because the thing is, you're saying this as an apologist, right? And you're saying this, but you're not an ulama.
Yeah, but I'm quoting them.
Right. So here's the thing.
Alim is a singular.
In terms of the prima facie statements of the Quran, there are many that simply contradict reality. And the only way you can get around that, the only way that you can get around that is to make the Quran say things it doesn't say.
No, but
which is what you've done.
Can I say
all the way? Wait, all the way through this discussion. So that was the first point. The second point, unfortunately, this guy started screaming in my ear, so I'm not sure that I remembered what you were saying. Where does the allegorical start and stop? Right, now that is done within the council of the church fathers. So what you do...
Of which Origin is not one.
Well, exactly. So your entire argument was built on someone that isn't even a church father. Let me finish. It is the full scope of the teaching of the church fathers. Think of them like a shura, think of them like a council. You compare all their writings together, and where they sort of focus in on, this is literal.
Are you talking about ecumenical councils?
No. I'm talking about reading the church fathers as a whole, and where they come to a consensus. This is literal. This is metaphorical. It falls within a spectrum, and it's the church fathers themselves in the reading of them whole that decides for us what is and what isn't. And there'll always be some that fall out of the lines this way and fall out of the lines that way.
What I'm saying to you is that the Islamic perspective, like for example on the muddy spring thing, what we are we are not trying. Why I quote classical authorities from the 3rd, 4th, 5th century is to show you that the understanding of people who are not influenced by modern discourses was not put in. It couldn't have been because we're talking about someone in the 4th century. So, for example, in the case of the round earth, I called him the Munada, right? So, who is one of the students of Ahmed ibn Hanbal. So we're talking about 250 or something, right? So he's a literalist, if anything. Yeah. He will be the equivalent of, I don't know who's a literalist, but maybe...
A biblical fundamentalist.
Yeah, maybe, something like that, right? So he's that. So when you put it from that perspective, what I'm saying is, so therefore he couldn't have, like for instance, you know the issue of the earth, the sun. There's one shared reading of Ibn Abbas, who's a companion of the Prophet, who put on top of the verse of chapter number 36, verse number 40, وَالشَّمْسُ تَجْرِي لِمُسْتَقَرٍ لَهَا ذَلِكَ تَقْدِيرُ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَكِيمِ. The sun runs to a course. He reads that وَالشَّمْسُ تَجْرِي لَا مُسْتَقَرَّ لَهَا. And he puts that in his like tafsir, his exegesis. Yeah. The sun runs without a place of setting.
Yeah.
So he's now exegeting. This man was praised by the Prophet himself. He was praised, he was taught. So it's unlikely that he's going to be trying to make the Quran say something it doesn't say. Do you see what I'm saying?
You know that there are hadiths where Muhammad repeats the claim that the earth sets in a puddle of mud outside of the Quran.
Those hadiths are weak.
Hassan. Not Da'if, they're Hassan.
No, they're weak.
No, wait, this is the point. I believe they're Hassan. I've seen them as Hassan.
Why is that Hassan?
Well, you talk to your Islamic scholars. I just see.
No,
one second. All I see is how Muslim scholars call it. Some Muslim scholars call it Hassan. You're obviously quoting some scholars say Da'if. I'll have to get you next week. One second.
No, I do give it to you. There's some that say it's Hassan.
Thanks. So I'm not lying.
No, you're not.
Thank you.
No.
So my point is, there are hadiths that are Hassan, right? And just for those that don't know, what is Hassan?
So there's the difference between Da'if and Hassan. Da'if is weak.
Yes, I know. Hassan.
Then you have another grade which is right above it. It's called Hassan al-Ghayrihi, which is Hassan because of another hadith.
Yeah.
So there may be 2 weak hadiths that make a Hassan al-Ghayrihi.
Yeah.
And then, but Hassan now is depending on which scholar. Because at-Tirmidhi, who wrote a Jama' at-Tirmidhi.
All I'm asking is what is Hassan? Just give us the short.
It's referred to as good.
Good.
It's not authentic. Sahih is authentic.
Yeah, I know authentic.
Yeah.
And then there's a level above Sahih.
Yeah.
So my point is that there are hadiths that are Hassan. I've seen them labeled Hassan on Islamic websites.
Exactly.
Right? I'm not in the habit of lying about these things, because I know you'll get blown up if you do. You gotta be clear about stuff. So what we've got is hadiths that are considered Hassan by some scholars, and that takes us into a whole other problem about hadiths, where Muhammad repeats the claim that the sun sets in a puddle of mud, and that is outside of the Quran. So it's clear that there is evidence that early Muslims believe that their prophet believed that the sun set in a puddle
No, but
of
the
mud.
thing is, if that was true, we should see that the early exegetes, like a Tabari, Ibn Kathir is not that early, but he's like somewhere in the 8th century AH. And those literalists, they should have taken that view because they didn't really care about science. For instance, the Qurtubi, who's an Andalusian scholar, he argues the earth is flat. Because of he used the Quran to argue the earth is flat.
Okay.
Right. So he says that it's, for example, Med al-Ard. Not what he didn't use what you used, by the way. He didn't use the Mehd, because that's not. He used.
Yeah, I've got the ones. I've got to find the ones with the carpet.
No, the carpet one is not a good one to use because it's not the one that the Islamic scholars use.
Well, all right.
I'll tell you which one.
Yeah, tell me the best one, and I'll come back and I'll use that.
The thing is, what I'm saying is.
No. I'm curious now. Go on. Tell us the best
one. He
one.
uses chapter 13, verse 2.
Chapter 13, verse 2.
Yeah. He doesn't use Mehd. Mehd is a weak. What you were saying was kind of weak.
Yeah, go on.
Al-Qurtubi mentions Med al-Ard. He stretched the earth.
Yeah.
He says stretched it. That indicates the flatness of it.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that these scholars, they didn't care about scientific, let's say we're apologists or whatever.
I'm listening.
He didn't give a damn like that. So Al-Qurtubi would mention this kind of thing. You got it, yeah?
I'm looking for it. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, on the literal interpretation, there are 2 interpretations. There's one which says it's round and one that says it's flat.
So we agree that there are scholars that don't use literal interpretation.
Say again?
So there are scholars in Islam that are not using literal interpretation.
On naturalistic phenomena.
Yeah.
No. No, there isn't.
So all Muslim scholars
so
are
let me
using
tell you,
literal.
On the naturalistic stuff.
Yeah.
Practically all of them.
Okay.
So we'll talk about the Ash'ari school,
Yeah.
the Athari school,
Yeah.
and the Maturidi school, and the Mu'tazili school.
Yeah.
So even someone like Az-Zamakhshari, who was a Mu'tazilite, he would see all of those things as literal.
Yeah.
The only ones who didn't were the falasifa. The falasifa.
Yeah.
The philosophers.
Yeah.
But they're not.
Like Ghazali.
No, Ghazali was Ash'ari.
Okay, fair enough.
The philosopher like Ibn Sina, Avicenna,
Yeah.
Al-Farabi, Al-Kindi.
Yeah.
They didn't. So, for example, Al-Farabi, Al-Kindi, and Avicenna, they didn't believe in even the Day of Judgment was going to be physical.
So, I mean, this is fascinating, right? You know, one day, Hijab, it would be nice for me and you to sit down in a place without the crowds.
Yes.
You know, and to have a proper conversation. Because I much prefer this than the shouting matches, to be honest.
I do.
You know, I can do, as you know, I can do shouting matches all day.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, right? But ultimately, it just becomes too confrontational. This kind of discourse is good. What I'm going to leave you, because
I've got one question for you, though.
Let me make one point, and then you ask one question.
Curious point.
Let me make one point. But what you're going to see is, in the course of our calm conversation, you undid your arguments against the Christian faith. Well, people will make their own judgment.
Yeah, of course.
But I think that in the course of our calm conversation,
Yeah.
you actually undermined all the arguments you made to the
I don't
crowd.
think so.
Yeah.
I think I just clarified what I thought was straw man's.
Yeah.
But let me tell you something, right?
Okay, what was your question?
My question was this. You know, you stated that the church fathers.
Yeah.
Tell me if you didn't state it like this, no problem. But you say that the church fathers, okay, that they had this allegorized understanding of, for example, they didn't exegete Genesis in a literal way.
Yeah.
So who are you referring to in particular?
Augustine, he would be a perfect example. He actually draws out all of the, if you take it literally, all of the obvious prima facie contradictions.
In what book are we talking about?
I'll have to look it up.
Because there's two that I've read. I'll tell you what I've read. Let me explain. There's two. I've read Against the Manichaeans, and I've read a literal interpretation. By the way, a literal interpretation is going to be hard for you to access. It's not easily. You can't get it on PDF.
Yeah.
I had to go around to get that book.
Yeah.
I actually had to go around to get that book, and I read it. But here's my conclusion.
So just let me give you
I
the
don't
example.
think he does actually allegorize it.
Augustine, all the church fathers use allegory. It's
I know, but what I'm saying is that
one
Genesis
second.
account.
Allegory is the most consistent use of scripture in the church fathers.
Fine, but what I'm saying is, we're talking about, for example, Genesis narrative, right?
Yeah,
No, what
even
you said,
all of the Old Testament, they do it throughout the entirety of the Old Testament.
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying
and
is,
in the New Testament.
But Augustine, when I read his books, when I read his exegesis on it, he doesn't seem to allegorize it at all. There's no indication of that.
In my reading of Augustine, he definitely argues.
He refused Alexandria school.
Yeah, he does, because he thinks they think they go too far.
Yes.
But he definitely argues against the idea.
Can I tell you what he says?
It definitely argues against the idea of reading Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 literally. He basically points out, if you read it literally, they contradict one another. And that's the argument that you were making.
Yes, I know.
So you were insisting upon a reading that is alien to Christianity.
No. But Augustine does say that. He problematizes it, but he doesn't say therefore we should allegorize it.
Okay, we'll have to look it up and see exactly what he says.
But what I'm saying is,
but he doesn't argue for a literal
let me. Can I just tell you what I read and tell me what you think? Yeah. I read John of Chrysostom. Yeah, is that how you pronounce his name? Chrysostom. Yeah. He had an exegesis of Genesis. Origen had an exegesis of Genesis. Augustine had an exegesis. Not all of them had it.
Yeah.
The one Origen had was more homiletic.
Yeah.
It wasn't intended to be like. Augustine was not trying to. It's not homily. He was trying to be scrupulous and scholarly, right?
Yeah.
And he's two different things. So these are the three main ones I've read. I know other church fathers have commented on it, but haven't written or spoken homiletic, for example, preaching the Genesis narrative. From that, what I saw was that Origen seemed to be an outcast, really, from that perspective. So what I'm saying is, here's why I don't think it's actually a point where using him is a problem. I say, because if you used him, okay, what I'm saying is, you said he's not normative, right? From your understanding.
Yeah, he's not. He's an ecclesiastical right. That's why he's not.
I know he's an ecclesiastical right. They haven't put him in as because of the Origen crisis, right? You know what the Origen crisis is?
Yeah, it came in the 5th century.
Yes. So what I'm saying is
and I think it was harsh and unfair.
Yeah. Most people do. Most scholars that I've read, and that's why I'm surprised with you kind of like degrading him a little bit. He seemed to be a very intelligent man, to be honest with you.
He was.
And he seemed to be a man of truth. you know what I was
committed to truth. But one second, because
one thing I read from him, that, do you know what?
Wait, I'm going to try and help you be a better apologist. Because you quote Origin.
Well, I think we're both sharpening ourselves.
Yeah, you quote Origin a lot, right? And the thing is, there's no doubt that in terms of church history, he was the first Christian writer of great scope.
Yeah,
I mean,
the most voluminous.
Yeah, he was exactly voluminous. He was. His mind was willing to touch everything. But the thing is, just because he was the first in great scope doesn't mean that he was the sharpest or the best.
Okay, yeah.
And the thing is, Origin, I if you look at First Principles and study it carefully, you can actually spot where he goes off the rails in his thinking.
Yeah, I know.
You can trace
when he
out.
talks about the sun and the moon being is it animate or inanimate?
Oh, bro, yeah, it's even. I think it's even a bit before that. But the thing is as you trace out his thinking, you can see it. Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Oh crap! And then he just goes off the rails because he makes one logical mistake. And it's about the material. It's about the attributes of God, which is inside
reading
Islam.
him. I've read him.
Yeah.
Well, let me make one point.
It was the idea about the eternal creator, which is something you have in Islam, and an eternal creator means an eternal creation.
But let me say one more thing.
Eternal material.
Do you know one thing he said that I read that actually made me really like him?
Something. God, this would be great.
Honestly, do you know what he said? He was talking about, and this is in his book First Principles. I read the whole thing.
Yeah.
And to the back of it, he was talking about these things that I was talking to you about in Butterworth's translation, and he said, "We need to." This is what he said, and I was so taken aback by it. And I changed my mind on all the church fathers after I read that statement.
I know what you like as a salesman, Hijab. So let's cut the salesmanship.
He said this.
Just come to the point.
He goes, "We need to look at the words of the Bible carefully to discern which of it is from God and which of it is from man."
Yeah.
And I thought, this guy's sincere.
And this is one of the reasons why he would be considered an ecclesiastical writer as opposed to a church father. Because the Orthodox Christian position is every part of the Bible is the word of God, and every part of the Bible is the word of man. That is exactly what we believe about the Bible. That it is
But you don't believe in
Spirit.
inerrancy?
God's Spirit. No, you see, you've got to listen to me.
I'm listening, yeah.
So the Holy Spirit has inspired every word that man has written in the Bible.
But even
all
the
of it. Now, in terms of the inerrancy, right, because you didn't listen when I said it in the debate, so I'll say it to you now. I believe that every part of the Bible is true. Did you hear that? Every part of the Bible is true, properly understood. Which means that those parts that are not meant to be read literally, you don't read them literally. Those parts that are meant to be read literally, you do read them literally. And even on the literal bits, let's just be clear, like, even on the literal bits, when you consider the fact that the Bible is a written account of people's behavior, it's not going to be as, say, perfect as a camera movie of the same events. It will always miss out details. There'll always be room to fit something else in. So when I invite you to the Christian faith, and I do invite you to the Christian faith.
That's the first time you said that.
No, I'm inviting you.
Oh, you're attacking us all this time.
So I'm inviting you to the Christian faith. I'm not inviting you to believe something like Islam. I'm inviting you to believe something better than Islam.
I understand what you're saying, but let me tell you something, right? You know, you said truth. In philosophy, there's different definitions of truth.
Yeah.
So there's, for example, the consistency, coherentism.
Yeah.
There's correspondence theory, which just seems to be the most like popular understanding. And then you have like pragmatism and different types of. Now, from what I understood, from what you've said, is that the truth of the Bible is not necessarily from a correspondence theory perspective, in the sense that when we say correspondence theory, Bertrand Russell mentions in his book Problems of Philosophy, and others have agreed with him, and this is probably the most popular theory, that, say for example, truth is that which corresponds to objective reality.
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas coherentism, it doesn't have to be correspondent with objective reality, so long as it's internally consistent. So it's coherent.
Yeah.
Here's my only issue with it. You know, with the philosophical understandings of truth, whether we're talking about pragmatism or coherentism or correspondence theory, it would seem like the Bible doesn't fit into any of them. And say why? Because let's say it's not correspondence, so I accept. We don't accept truth as correspondence for the sake of argument. it has to be read on its terms. I understand what you're saying. We're saying it has to be correspondence. We do believe in that, right? And you're basically saying that you can't apply that standard on us. And I say, okay, fine, accept it. Let's take a coherentism understanding. That so long as it's internally coherent. The problem is, what use is there of metaphors which contradict each other? Like, for example, if you have a metaphor, like if I speak about the difference between validity and soundness of an argument, is that validity could talk about something which is coherent but not actually in objective reality. So if I say, for example, a unicorn done XYZ, that's a coherent story. If I say a tall short man or a black and white at the same time, or a tall short man or a squared circle, that goes against every definition of truth. What I'm saying is, for example, in the Bible, in Genesis, when
it might surprise you, I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So in Genesis, when it talks about, for example, that the plants were made on the third day, and on in chapter 2 it says no plant has sprung up yet. Even if we take this as allegorical, the issue is it's not coherent. So even if we wanted to take a different understanding of truth, it still fails that.
So let me reply, because you've actually raised what is a very good question, which, to be fair, to be fair, is the first time I think I've ever heard you raise a good question, which is, what is the point of metaphors that contradict one another?
Yes.
This is something that is widely discussed in Christian spirituality, because Christian theologians are obviously aware that there are metaphors, even in Jesus' parables, that are in contradiction. The idea of being a slave, the idea of being a son. How can you be the son and the slave of your father? That's a contradictionary metaphor. And Christians understand the idea of contradictory metaphor in terms of praxis. The idea is that you are meant to live in the middle of these two contradictory metaphors, not embracing one to the neglect of the other, not embracing 50 from one and 50 from other to make 100, but embracing both 100% simultaneously. So the idea of using the son and the slave idea. God is my father. I see myself as adopted into the family of God. But God is also a king. He also rules and owns me. He created me. And so I must act as a son and as a subject at exactly and identically the same time.
That's a good answer. Right? Let me tell you why it's a good answer, right? It's a good answer if I would accept that, if you said that all the biblical kind of direction to the end user was what to do with their own lives.
You made multiple points. Let me reply.
Just let me get to this point. Let me tell you something. Right?
No. Wait.
Please, before it comes to my head, man.
Hijab.
All right, go on.
No, right. I also want to point out to you something. That the purpose of the Bible in the Christian faith is very different from the purpose of the Quran in the Islamic faith. The purpose of the Quran is the nascent proto-genesis of Sharia. It is the basis, the framework, the scaffolding upon which the Hadith put the layers. Am I being unfair? No, that's fair, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, but the point of the Bible...
But that's not the only point.
The point of the Bible is that it is the means by which we understand God and ourselves in the world, the narrative by which we live our lives.
Right, I understand. But here's the issue, right? So we have two types of injunctions, let's say, or types of sentences in the Quran, for the sake of, or in any speech. We have sentences which are either commands to people, telling them what to do, right? And you have what you call khabar, or narratives. Now, I understand even if what you said is a little bit far-fetched, that praxis and you have to live between the two metaphors, I accept for the sake of argument. The issue here is, when it comes to statements about history, okay, when we're talking about narrative, the truth of the matter is, every logician on the face of the earth will tell you that two contradictory things is a meaningless statement. It doesn't exist. It's not real. It's worse than myth. There's no nature in which, or there's no possible world in which what you're saying makes sense.
No, you misunderstand.
So just on this point, right?
You misunderstand.
The idea, if God is telling me that the plants were created on the third day, in Genesis 1:12, whatever it was, and then in Genesis 2:5, he's saying no plant has sprung up yet. He's not telling us to be anything here. So you said hold on. He's not telling us to be anything here. He's not telling us to be between two practices or nothing. He's just saying two things which contradict each other, which for all intents and purposes, really, you can say is a meaningless.
Okay, let me reply to that, because I understand what you're saying.
But
But you're wrong. You're so wrong, Hijab. The point of Genesis, think about who Genesis was revealed to. It was revealed to the free slaves of Egypt. And what were they born into? Those slaves, those ignorant, barbarized slaves. Let me finish. They were born into a polytheistic society in which there was a god for the water, and a god for the sun, and a god for the land, and a god for the plants, and a god for these animals, and a god for that animals. So Genesis is telling them something. It's telling them that there is only one God and only one creator, and he is the creator of everything that is created. These Bronze Age barbarized slaves were not looking for a science lesson. They were looking for a theological lesson.
Can I come back?
1 second.
Right.
And they get that in Genesis. You are repeating the same error that you made in our debate. You are assuming that because we live in a modernist scientific world, that people back in the Bronze Age were also thinking scientifically. They were not. And so a scientific, a scientific criticism of Genesis is invalid because it wasn't written scientifically for a scientific people.
I grant you that. Here's what I said.
Thank you.
No. I grant you. Let's go with that for the sake of argument. That it's not meant as a scientific thing, right?
So a scientific criticism is invalid.
No, I don't think it is invalid. But what I'm saying is, let's take for the sake of argument that you can interpret the Bible in a way which is non-scientific, allegorical.
You definitely can.
Allegorical.
You definitely can.
Yeah, fine, no problem. Yeah, what I'm saying is this: even on that basis, okay, if you do that, if you look at Genesis 1:12, where it says that the plants had been made on the third day, and look at Genesis 2:5, where it said no plant has sprung up yet. Here, this particular specificity, I'm not talking about the entire, the motif or the theme of Genesis. This is contradictory. So I am left to assume that it's false. Now, even on a coherentist understanding of truth, not a correspondence understanding. I'm not saying it has to correspond with objective reality. I'm saying even on a coherentist understanding, there's no need for that to be the case. Now what I'm saying is this: the Quran, it's not saying, when it says لَوَجْدُ فِي اخْتِلَافًا, if this was from other than God, they would have found in it many contradictions. What it's saying is that it's the principle of sufficient and necessary conditions. Now, the truth of the matter is, in our logical day-to-day life, we require a certain level of, there's an evidentiary bar that is required in order for us to come to a conclusion about things. If that evidentiary bar is not met, then we can't believe in those things. How can I be punished for disbelieving in contradictory statements?
So let me address that point. Because once again, you've demonstrated what all your Dawah mates do. Ali Dawah, Shamsi, I know he's not your mate. Hashim, Mansour, you all make this cartoonish characterization of Christianity and then you attack it. If you had actually taken the time to read Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, you would see that what they are communicating is different.
No, I have.
Genesis 1 is talking about the creation of the world and everything in it. Genesis 2 is talking about man's place in the world. So it's talking about the creation from the theological perspective of the importance of mankind. So the chronology is not actually important because the teaching theologically is different.
Why is it
One second, let me finish. You should also know that there's plenty of Christians that do harmonizations between these things. You should know that.
I know that.
But
most of them don't.
Because most of them recognize that from a literary point of view, you don't need to, because it's buying into a modernist myth, which is this idea that we should judge ancient literature by a scientific.
So is it Ishiology?
One second. By a scientific paradigm of today, and that is ahistorical. Now, let's come back to the Quran, because the Quran.
No, but you didn't answer what I said.
But the Quran. The Quran, as we've demonstrated in our discussion, makes statements that are factually false. They do not correspond to reality.
No, but that's what you're saying. What I'm saying is that, look, can I just come back on this, yeah? We have to understand, okay, you keep saying this, if you want to be a serious apologist, that's more than just like a propagandist. You need to kind of listen to what I'm saying a little bit here. Everyone knows that, I've just told you this, the literal interpretation of the Quran is understood by the language. what the language can facilitate.
Yeah.
For example, you mentioned alaqa, yeah? Alaqa has 3 meanings in the Arabic language. In fact, the word is used in other places in the Quran.
That's the one about the leech and
Yeah, the clinging and stuff.
yeah, the clinging.
Well, you know, it's mentioned وَلَا تَذَرُوهَا كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ when it talks about when you have more than one wife. Don't go to one and leave the other one hanging, suspended.
Now that would be metaphorical, wouldn't it?
Of course it is.
Yeah.
You know, I believe in metaphor in the Quran. Right. I'm not saying we don't believe in metaphoric language. What we're saying is, when you metaphorize which are not intended to be metaphorized, that's where the problems come. Here's what I'm saying is, going back to the metaphors that contradict each other. So are you happy to say that it's ischiology, it's myth, that Genesis is myth?
I am happy to say that a literal reading of Genesis is not what is meant to be
Right,
understood.
so is it myth?
Yeah, so long as we don't do a false equivalence that myth means false.
No, I'm not saying
Because
that.
I believe that the mythology of Genesis
Yes.
is completely true.
I know that, I know.
I believe every word of Genesis.
I know that, yeah, you're saying that. So you believe that Genesis is a myth, but you're depending on some kind of coherent understanding of truth. What I'm saying is, the problem is even a myth which contradicts itself is useless.
No.
It's meaningless.
Yeah, because you're asserting a contradiction based on a prima facie literal reading. And I keep telling you that the prima facie literal reading is not how you're supposed to read Genesis.
So, okay, you know when it says no Quran has sprung up yet?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So it's talking, well, let's look at that entire chapter. Because bad dawah is taking verses out of their context, right? So the Genesis story in chapter 2 is talking ultimately about the creation of man and the importance of man to creation. That man is the priest of God in creation, that he's meant to be God's representative on earth in creation to care and to cultivate. That's the story of Genesis 2.
What I would say to you though,
So the point is,
you mentioned something about modernism, right? Can I just say one second. One second.
Yeah. But the reality is, if you assert that the Quran, when it, for instance, talks about the idea of the blood clot,
yeah, but I'm saying blood is not the only thing.
Right, but the point is, that's factually false.
What are you saying? Well,
I'm saying that an embryo is not a blood clot. Are you arguing that an embryo is a blood clot?
Let me tell you what I said, right? The word is alaqa.
Yes.
What does alaqa mean?
It's been translated as blood clot.
It can be translated as blood clot, but there's 3 translations.
It literally translates in this Quran.
Bro, you have to listen to what I'm saying. I've done a whole series on this, right?
I am
You can check it on Sapiens Institute. What I'm saying is this, is that one of the words I've just told you, it means to suspend. And I just gave you an example in the Quran, that وَلَا تَذَرُوهَا كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ وَلَا تَمِيلُوا كُلَّ الْمَيْلِ فَتَذَرُوهَا كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ. So if you have 2 wives, 3 or 4, don't go to one and then just leave the other one like that, so you leave her suspended.
So are you saying, you're saying that this is metaphor?
What? No, it's not metaphor. No.
So it's not metaphor.
No.
You're
not understanding what I'm saying.
When it says,
Let him carry on. He said 3
then
points.
we made the nutfa into a clot.
Okay, good.
Is that accurate or inaccurate?
Yeah, it's accurate.
So you actually believe
it's a
that
clot,
an embryo is a blood clot?
No, hold on.
Coagulated blood. That's what you believe.
Just jumped on another
You're going on
point.
to another point. What I'm saying is that you're saying it's bad dawah. You've already referred to the Genesis account as a myth. I'm explaining to you.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
No,
it's not a bad thing.
Right, let's finish now.
We're finished.
Right. What I'm saying is, even if you understand it, yeah. Oh, careful. It's gonna break, man. Bro, man, be careful. That's gonna fall and break. Yeah. There's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he said, "Naha an-Nabiy sallallahu alaihi wasallam an ad-daman." He said that there are 2 things, 2 bloods which are prohibited. 2 bloods.
Yep.
He said at-tahal and the spleen and the lung and the liver. Yeah. Now, in Arabic language, we have to understand this, because if you don't get this, you will not improve your apologetics. That's it. You may get the low-laying people, but you're not going to get the high level.
I'm happy to let other people judge.
Listen. The Prophet referred to the spleen and the liver as 2 bloods. Okay, even though there's no blood there, they're not blood. It's not blood. So what it is that the Arab custom is that you describe something by how it looks. Do you understand this?
I'm hearing you.
And this is an evidence, because the Prophet said 2 bloods, and it wasn't actually blood, actual blood. It was the liver and the spleen. So when the Quran states it's alaqa, even the translation which says blood clot, it doesn't mean by composition, it means by aesthetic value. Do you understand this?
I hear that.
Okay, good. Now, that's what I'm saying. There's 3 primary meanings. One of them means that. One of them means alaqa, something which clings. Another thing means something which is like a clot. Yeah?
Right, let me reply to this. And then we're going to have to stop. Because if you get any more microphones on you, no matter how strong you are, you're just going to fall over and that'll be falling into me. So the point is,